Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and frankly pragmatic blueprint for climate action coming out of India. It's an approach that's all about balancing those big green goals with the very real needs of economic growth and energy security. So, let's get into how it actually works.
But first, let's kick things off with a pretty big question that's making waves all over the globe. Is the whole energy transition kinda running into trouble? The big push for a net zero future was often sold as this straightforward path, but the reality, well, it's turning out to be a whole lot more complicated. And this is where it gets really interesting. We're getting a major reality check from Europe, which, let's be honest, is often seen as leading the charge. In the Netherlands, the grid is so jammed from the fast rollout of renewables that they're literally asking people to use less power. Over in Spain, having too much renewable energy at once has actually made the network unstable. The lesson here is pretty clear. If you decarbonize too fast without making sure the whole system, the grid, storage, backup power is ready for it, you don't get resilience, you get fragility.
Okay, so with that context set, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to look at this new climate reality, dive deep into India's development-first strategy, and then we'll break down its three main pillars: adaptation, mitigation, and, of course, the huge challenge of climate finance.
So let's get to the heart of it. India's really unique development-first approach. Now, this isn't about ignoring climate change, not at all. It's about sequencing the transition in a smart way, a way that lines up with growth, security, and making sure the country is actually ready for these massive changes.
And this, right here, really puts things in perspective. Even though it's the most populous country on Earth, India's per-person greenhouse gas emissions are less than half the global average. This context is absolutely critical because it shapes their entire philosophy. The top priority isn't just about cutting emissions, it's about making sure hundreds of millions of people have a rising standard of living.
And that leads us to this really powerful idea that guides everything. Development is, in itself, a form of adaptation. Just think about that for a second. If you have stronger hospitals, better roads, and more productive farms, your society is automatically more resilient to climate shocks like floods or droughts. So growth isn't the enemy of climate action, it's actually a prerequisite for it.
This whole strategy really stands on three main pillars. First, a laser-like focus on adaptation, dealing with the climate impacts that are happening right here, right now. Second, a very balanced, very pragmatic approach to mitigation. And third, a super robust plan for domestic finance to actually pay for all of this.
So let's dive into that first pillar, adaptation. For a country as vulnerable to floods, droughts, and rising sea levels as India, building resilience isn't just a good idea, it's an absolute necessity. It's about protecting lives, protecting jobs, and protecting the entire economy.
And you can literally see this shift in thinking right here on the state level. In the early days, these state action plans on climate change were mostly about mitigation, cutting emissions. But look at them now. The focus has totally flipped to adaptation-led development. They're weaving climate resilience directly into state budgets, into planning, into social programs, and, this is key, giving communities a really strong role.
And this isn't just talk. Look at these incredible innovations happening on the ground. In Meghalaya, you've got communities using high-tech GIS mapping to protect their water springs. In Odisha, community-run water projects have jacked up farm output by almost 70%. These are real, bottom-up solutions that are changing people's lives for the better.
Let's just zoom in on one of these for a second. Ahmedabad's heat insurance. The idea is so simple but so powerful. The insurance automatically pays out to informal women workers when the temperature hits a certain dangerous level. Why? To make up for the wages they lose because it's simply too hot to work. It's a brilliant way to treat heat stress not just as a health problem, but as an economic one, providing a direct financial safety net.
Okay, let's switch gears to our second pillar, a balanced approach to mitigation. This is all about ramping up clean energy, but with a serious dose of realism, learning from those challenges that we just saw happening in Europe.
And the progress here is pretty remarkable. As of late 2025, India has already blown past its goal of getting over half of its installed power capacity from non-fossil fuel sources. That is a massive achievement, driven by a huge build-out of solar and wind. But installed capacity isn't the whole story. And this is why. The sheer amount of stuff you need for the green transition is just staggering. To get enough copper for just 1 gigawatt of wind power, just one, you have to process almost 500,000 tons of ore, and that's not even counting all the waste rock. It just goes to show you the immense mining and logistical hurdles we're talking about.
So what does this all mean? Well, it means that these materials, lithium, cobalt, copper, they've become the new oil. They're the strategic choke points of the 21st century economy. Whoever controls the supply of these minerals basically has huge influence over the entire energy transition, which turns a climate issue into a major geopolitical one.
And that leads us perfectly into our third and final pillar, the money. How on earth do you fund a multi-trillion-dollar transition, especially when the global financial system itself has some pretty clear biases?
This chart tells a really stark story. Out of all the private money flowing into climate projects around the world, something like 85% of it goes to advanced economies and China. The entire rest of the developing world has to make do with just 15%. Now, that's not because they don't have good projects. It's because of perceived risks and just structural issues in global finance. So, for developing nations, relying on this skewed system just isn't an option.
And that is precisely why building up a domestic financial market is so incredibly important. As you can see here, India has been successfully issuing its own government-backed green bonds, raising tens of thousands of crores to fund public green projects. This creates a self-reliant financial ecosystem and sends a huge signal to the private market.
And this just brilliantly shows how that trickles down to the local level. It's not just the national government anymore. Cities like Indore, Ahmedabad, and Ghaziabad are now issuing their own municipal green bonds to fund really specific local projects like solar plants and water treatment facilities. This is how you connect the big money directly to real, tangible climate action on the ground.
So, as we start to wrap this up, this quote really hits the nail on the head. The end goal can't just be a clean transition. If it isn't affordable, and if it doesn't account for the development needs of billions of people, it's not going to be fast, and it's certainly not going to be just.
Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Is this pragmatic development-first pathway, prioritizing adaptation, balancing mitigation with energy security, and building your own financial muscle, is this the real blueprint that other developing nations, and maybe even the whole world, will end up having to follow? It's definitely something to think about.